The shackles of misery. She lived in a house that felt more like a cage than a home. The paint was peeling from the walls, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the windows were always shut tight, as if keeping something inside or keeping something out. For years, this worn-down place had been the only world she knew, a world painted in shadows and silence. Her name was Mara. To the outside world, she was quiet, almost invisible, but behind her eyes was a storm, a fierce, restless desire for something more. Something better than the life she was trapped in. Every morning, she woke with a weight on her chest, a heaviness born from years of fear and pain. The misery in her life wasn't just about poverty or loneliness. It was the kind of misery that burrows deep into your bones, born from broken promises, harsh words, and the absence of safety. Mara's father was a man consumed by his own anger, the kind of anger that didn't always show itself in shouts or violence, but in cold looks and sharp commands that made the air in the house hard to breathe. He had dreams once, or so Mara was told, but those dreams died somewhere along the way, crushed under the weight of disappointment and regret. Now, his bitterness was the only legacy she inherited, a shadow that stretched over every moment of her life. Her mother, once a bright spark in the household, had retreated into silence, worn down by years of trying to hold the family together. She moved like a ghost through the house, her eyes vacant, her spirit broken. Mara often caught glimpses of her mother's pain, the way she would flinch at sudden noises, the way her hands trembled as she prepared meals that no one seemed to appreciate. It was a quiet kind of suffering, but no less real. Mara's childhood was a patchwork of stolen moments, hiding in the attic to escape the tension downstairs, running barefoot through overgrown fields behind the house, and whispering secrets to the few stars she could see through the grime on her bedroom window. Those stars were her only friends, tiny beacons of hope in a night that seemed endless. School was no refuge. Mara was good at hiding, blending into the background so well that teachers often overlooked her. She kept her head down, careful never to draw attention, because attention was dangerous. Kids could be cruel, and sometimes their cruelty echoed the cruelty she knew at home. There were no fairy tales or dreams at school, just a quiet endurance, a daily act of survival. Yet beneath the surface, Mara's mind was alive with stories of distant places where freedom was real, where people smiled without fear, where life was measured not in how much you endured but in how much you dared to hope. She read whatever books she could get her hands on, escaping into worlds far from the crumbling house and cold silence. But hope was a fragile thing. It flickered inside her like a candle in the wind, easily snuffed out by a harsh word or a slammed door. She knew that the world outside was not all light and happiness, but it was still better than the darkness she was trapped in. She dreamed of walking away, of leaving the misery behind. But she also knew that freedom wouldn't come without a price. One day, the weight of her life became too heavy to bear. It was a day like any other, but something inside Mara shifted. Maybe it was the way her father's eyes gleamed with fury over something small, or the way her mother's quiet tears left trails down her cheeks, or maybe it was the ache in Mara's own chest, a pain she could no longer ignore. That day, she made a promise to herself, in the silence of her room, beneath the watchful stars, that she would find a way out. The promise was a spark. It was the only thing she had brought from the outside world, a gift from a teacher who saw something in her, something worth saving. The pages were filled with sketches, scribbled notes, and half-formed plans. Tonight, they held something new, a plan to escape. Her hands trembled, not just from the chill that seeped through the thin walls, but from a mix of fear and exhilaration. She knew the risks. Running away wasn't a simple solution. It was a gamble, one that might cost her everything. But for the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of control, of agency, and it frightened and excited her in equal measure. The house was silent except for the distant ticking of a clock in the hallway. Her father was asleep, snoring heavily, in his creaky chair, and her mother was already upstairs, curled into a fragile shape on the threadbare couch. If she left now, no one would notice until morning. That was the window she needed. Mara traced the route in her mind again, down the cracked sidewalk, past the rundown grocery store, and into the woods beyond the edge of town. The forest was dense and dark, but it promised cover. It was a place where she could disappear. After that, she would find a bus station, find a way to a city, find a new life. But first, she had to survive the night. She pulled on her worn jacket, slipping a small backpack over her shoulders. Inside were the essentials she could gather: a flashlight with weak batteries, a few pieces of stale bread, and a half-empty water bottle. There was no money there, had never been money, but what she lacked in resources, she made up for in resolve. Every sound made her jumper creak from the floorboards. The rustling of the wind outside, the soft breathing of her family. She wished she could say goodbye, but there was no safety in farewells. No one would understand. To them, leaving was betrayal. The moment she stepped outside, the cold night air hit her face, sharp and biting. The world beyond her room was vast and frightening, but it was also filled with possibility. The stars above twinkled, distant and indifferent, but they reminded her of the dreams she had clung to for so long. Her footsteps were soft against the pavement as she made her way down the street. Each step a mix of hope and terror. The houses she passed were dark, the curtains drawn tight, lived behind locked doors. Mara felt both invisible and exposed at the same time. Halfway to the woods, she paused behind a crumbling brick wall to catch her breath. Her heart pounded, a wild drumbeat in her chest. What if someone saw her? What if she got caught? What if freedom was just another kind of prison? But she pushed the doubts away. She thought of the cold dinners, the harsh words, the silent tears. She thought of the years lost to fear and waiting. Freedom was worth any price. The woods welcomed her with the scent of pine and earth. A strange comfort after years of suffocation. She moved carefully, avoiding broken branches and hidden roots, guided by moonlight filtering through the canopy. Every rustle made her flinch. Every shadow seemed alive, but she kept going. Hours passed. Her legs ached, her throat was dry, and the weight of the backpack seemed heavier than before. Hunger gnawed at her, but she refused to stop. This was her escape, her rebellion against the life that had been forced upon her. As dawn began to break, casting pale light through the trees, Mara reached the edge of the forest. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of a bus station, beacon of possibility. She didn't know where the bus would take her, or what awaited on the other side. But it was a step toward freedom. For the first time in years, Mara allowed herself a small, shaky smile. The price of freedom was uncertain and high, but the spark inside her burned brighter than ever. Her journey had just begun. Flight into the unknown. The bus smelled of stale coffee and worn vinyl seats, a sharp contrast to the cold, earthy scent of the forest Mara had just left behind. The hum of the engine filled the cabin, steady and relentless, pushing her forward into the unknown. She pressed her forehead against the scratched window, watching the trees and small houses slip away. Swallowed by the growing light of morning, her heart was a knot of nerves and exhaustion, every mile a mix of hope and fear. Mara didn't know where the bus was headed, she only knew it wasn't where she had come from. That alone was enough. Around her, passengers chatted quietly or stared into their phones, their lives seemingly ordinary and uncomplicated. Mara felt like an outsider, a secret carried in the folds of her jacket. She pulled the fabric tighter, as if it could shield her from the weight of her past. The city was a stranger's dream, tall buildings reaching toward a sky so vast it felt unreal. Streets filled with more people than Mara had ever seen it. Once, she stepped off the bus, clutching her small bag, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. She had no home here, no family, no one to turn to. Every face was unfamiliar, every sound overwhelming. The city breathed in and out around her, alive with possibilities but also dangers she could not yet see. Her plan was simple: find a shelter, get a job, start over. But simple plans don't survive contact with reality. The first night, Mara curled up in a corner of a crowded shelter, surrounded by the quiet shuffling of other lost souls. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of the house she had left behind and the uncertain road ahead. Days blurred together. Mara learned to navigate the city's labyrinth of streets and faces. She found odd jobs, cleaning floors, washing dishes, anything that could earn her enough for a cheap meal and a safe place to rest. The work was hard, exhausting, but it was hers. For the first time, she was earning on her own, living on her own terms. But freedom had its price. Loneliness gnawed at her. Without the familiar, even the painful, there was an ache she hadn't anticipated. She missed the rhythm of her old life, the quiet certainty of her misery. Now, every decision was hers, every failure her own. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. More than once, Mara considered giving up, returning to the known misery of her old life. But the memory of the dark house, the cold silences, and the promise she had made to herself kept her moving forward. One evening, as she walked home after a long day, Mara found herself in a narrow alleyway, the shadows closing in. A sudden shout, Footsteps behind her, panic surged through her veins. She ran, heart pounding, lungs burning, until she burst onto a busy street where strangers brushed past without noticing. That night, wrapped in her thin blanket, Mara realized that freedom wasn't just about leaving, it was about surviving the dangers that came with it. Every step forward demanded courage she wasn't sure she had. Yet, she refused to be defeated. She began to look for others like her, people who understood what it meant to escape, to rebuild, to fight for a future. Slowly, Mara found a small community, a patchwork family formed from shared hardship and hope. With their support, she started to dream again, not just of freedom, but of a life filled with purpose and belonging. It was a fragile dream, but it was hers. As the city lights flickered outside her window one night, Mara whispered a vow to herself. No matter the cost, she would hold on to her courage. Because freedom, she now understood, was not a place but a battle. A battle only the brave could win. The cost of freedom. Freedom tasted both sweet and bitter, like a wild berry plucked fresh but leaving a sharp aftertaste. Mara had escaped the walls that confined her, but the world outside was far from kind. Each day was a new struggle, a test of endurance and will. The price of freedom was steep, and she was paying it in full. The small apartment she managed to rent was a far cry from the house she had left behind. It was cramped and drafty, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet that kept her awake at night. But it was hers. No one yelled at her. No shadows loomed in the corners, only silence. Heavy and strange. Yet silence could be lonely. Mara's thoughts raced in the quiet hours, swirling around memories she tried to bury. The nightmares came back, her father's angry voice, her mother's silent tears, the crushing weight of years spent waiting for something better that never came. Freedom hadn't erased the past. It had merely peeled back the layers, exposing scars she had tried to hide. Her work was grueling. Long shifts washing dishes and scrubbing floors left her aching and exhausted. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at her hands, wondering if this was all her freedom had to offer. Hard labor, endless worry, and no rest. But she reminded herself of the promise she had made on that night when she first fled. She was free. No one could take that from her. Money was always tight. Bills piled up faster than she could pay them. There were days when she skipped meals just to stretch what little she had. The fear of running out, of losing everything she'd fought for, shadowed her every decision. Friends were scarce. Trust was a fragile thing, and Mara had learned how quickly it could be shattered. She kept people at arm's length, afraid that closeness might bring new pain or betrayal. But loneliness was a heavy burden, sometimes heavier than the chains she had broken free from. Despite everything, Mara's courage never faltered. She learned to ask for help, small steps toward building a life beyond survival. She found a community center that offered classes and support for people like her. Those who had escaped difficult pasts and were trying to rebuild. There, she met others who carried their own burdens and dreams. And for the first time, Mara felt a flicker of belonging. But the cost of freedom wasn't just in the hardships she faced daily. It was in the moments when she doubted herself, when fear whispered that she wasn't strong enough, that she would never truly be free. It was in the guilt that crept in, reminding her of what she left behind and what she might never see again. Mara missed her mother. She thought of her often, wondering if she was safe, if she was alive. The thought of reaching out terrified her. What if her mother rejected her? Or worse, what if her father found out where she was? The past was a shadow she couldn't outrun. One chilly evening, as Mara walked home beneath the sky smeared with clouds, she felt the weight of it all pressed down on her. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the fear, they converged into a heavy silence inside her chest. For a moment, she stopped and closed her eyes, letting the tears come. Not tears of weakness, but of release. When she opened her eyes, the city lights seemed to burn brighter, a reminder that she was still here, still fighting. She was free, and that freedom was worth every hardship. Mara took a deep breath and stepped forward into the night, ready to face whatever came next. Because courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the choice to keep going despite it. Inner battles. Freedom was supposed to feel like a sunrise, warm, bright, and full of promise. But for Mara, it often felt more like a storm raging inside her. A battle she fought every day in silence. She woke some mornings with a hollow ache, deep in her chest, a loneliness so fierce it threatened to swallow her whole. The quiet apartment that once felt like a sanctuary, sometimes became a cage of memories, where shadows of the past whispered doubts and regrets. Mara's mind was a battlefield. On one side stood her dreams, the hope for a new life, a fresh start, far from the misery she had left behind. On the other side, the ghosts of her past, fear, guilt, and pain. Sometimes, she caught herself wondering if she had made a mistake. Was freedom worth the cost? Could she bear the loneliness, the uncertainty, the relentless pressure to survive? Those thoughts were like cracks in her armor, threatening to break her resolve. But Mara was no stranger to fear. She had lived with it for years, hidden beneath layers of quiet endurance. Now, she had to face it head-on. One afternoon, as gray clouds gathered over the city, Mara found herself sitting alone in the community center. The hum of conversations around her fading into the background. She watched others, people who had survived their own battles, who carried their scars with quiet dignity. She realized she wasn't alone. Slowly, she began to open up, sharing pieces of her story with those who understood. It was terrifying at first, exposing the fragile parts of herself, but it also brought a sense of relief, like letting air into a wound. Mara learned that courage wasn't just about bold actions or daring escapes. Sometimes, it was about the quiet strength to face your own pain, to ask for help, and to keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. She started writing again, filling pages with thoughts and feelings she had buried for too long. Words became a lifeline, a way to make sense of the chaos inside her. Each sentence was a small victory over the darkness. But the battle wasn't over. Fear still lurked in the corners, whispering that she wasn't strong enough, that her past would catch up with her. Guilt weighed heavily too, the guilt of leaving her mother behind. The guilt of surviving when others did not. Mara knew she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to live now. One night, as she looked out, over the city lights twinkling like distant stars, Mara made a silent promise. She would not let fear define her. She would not let guilt chain her to a life she had fought so hard to escape. The price of freedom was high, but so was her courage. With that resolve burning inside her, Mara stood tall against the storm within, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Finding strength, the city never truly slept. Its pulse bright neon signs, distant sirens. The murmur of footsteps was a constant reminder that life went on, relentlessly and without pause. For Mara, it was a strange kind of comfort. It meant the world was alive, moving forward, and so could she. The days had grown longer, but so had her resolve. She no longer saw herself as a shadow fleeing from a dark past. She was becoming someone new, someone who belonged here, even if this place still felt unfamiliar at times. Mara's first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was in a small community art class, held in the basement of the center she had come to frequent. The room was filled with laughter, chatter, and the scent of paint and clay. Here, people shared stories through colors and shapes rather than words. Here, Mara could breathe. She picked up a brush tentatively at first, her hands shaky, then with growing confidence. Painting was different from writing. It was wild, free, and messy. It let her channel emotions she struggled to speak aloud. Each stroke was a step away from her pain, a move toward healing. In that space, Mara met others who had been broken and were learning to piece themselves back together. There was Lila, who had escaped an abusive relationship, Jamal, who was rebuilding his life after prison, and May, a refugee from a distant country. They didn't ask questions about Mara's past. They simply understood the struggle of starting over. With their support, Mara began to see herself not as a victim but as a survivor. Each day brought new challenges but also small victories. She found a steady job at a local bookstore, where the scent of paper and ink felt like a balm to her soul. She learned to budget carefully, pay rent on time, and cook simple meals she enjoyed. Mara's courage grew in quiet moments. The first time she walked through the city alone at night without fear, the first smile she shared with a stranger, the first book she recommended to a customer. These moments were small but powerful, proof that she was reclaiming her life. One afternoon, Mara received a letter from her mother. It was short and cautious, but it meant everything. Her mother had found the courage to reach out, to bridge the silence that had stretched between them for so long. Mara's heart ached with a mixture of relief and sorrow, but also hope. They agreed to meet, carefully and slowly, in a public place, a park where the sun warmed the grass and children played nearby. The reunion was tentative at first, filled with tears and long pauses, but it was a beginning. Mara realized that freedom wasn't just about running away. It was about rebuilding bridges, healing wounds, and finding strength in connection. the price of freedom was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The scars of the past would never fully fade. But Mara had learned that courage was the light that could guide her through the darkness. As she walked home from the park that day, the city glittered around her like a promise. She was free not just from the misery she had escaped, but toward a future she was creating with her own hands. And, for the first time in a long time, Mara believed she could keep walking that path, no matter the cost. The price and the promised freedom was a victory, but it was not a destination. Mara had learned that the moment she crossed the threshold of her old life was the moment a new journey began, a journey marked by sacrifice, pain, and above all, courage. The battles she fought were no longer with the ghosts in a crumbling house, but with the scars etched deep in her heart. Each day was a test, to choose hope over despair, to build rather than break, to forgive without forgetting. The cost was high. There were nights when loneliness wrapped around her like a shroud, when exhaustion seeped into her bones, when the past whispered temptations to return to what was known, even if it was misery. But Mara stood firm. She had seen what fear and silence could do. She refused to let them win. Her relationship with her mother grew slowly, like a fragile flower pushing through cracked concrete. They shared stories, tears, and laughter, cautious, but healing. Mara knew forgiveness was not a single act but a daily choice. She chose it every day. Work was still hard. The bills still piled up. There were still moments of doubt, but Mara met them with a bravery that surprised even herself. She had become a woman who could stand alone, who could face the world with open eyes and a steady heart. The city, once intimidating and cold, had become her home. It held new challenges but also new joys, friendships, small celebrations, quiet nights reading by lamplight. Mara had learned to find beauty in the ordinary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple, Mara stood on the rooftop of her building. The wind tugged at her hair. The city buzzed quietly beneath her feet. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She had paid a price for her freedom, a price measured in pain and sacrifice. But it was a price she was proud to pay, because freedom was more than escape. It was courage. It was resilience. It was the fierce determination to claim a life worth living, no matter the cost. Mara smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, she was ready. She was free, and freedom, she knew, was the greatest gift of all.